Today I'm comparing the all-new M2 iPad Air versus the M1 iPad Air. And in this video, I'm diving into specs, features, and subtle nuances between the devices, my experience with both of them, and stick to the end of the video where I'll reveal which one I'd personally choose if I were buying one today. Hey everyone, it's Andrew and welcome back to the channel. Having the M2 iPad Air for the last few days now, it seems like it would be very similar, but I was actually surprised at some of the differences, even though on the outside everything is pretty much the exact same. Let's start with design, size, and weight. Both of these iPads are nearly identical. Both have the exact same dimensions. The height is 247.6 millimeters. It has a width of 178.5 millimeters, a depth of 6.1 millimeters, and, depending on the model you get, a weight of 462 grams. The slightest difference comes with the diagonal length. The M1 iPad Air is 10.9 inches and the new M2 iPad Air is 11 inches. Both versions are very light and thin. Obviously they're the same, but I think the design is quite good and there's a reason why Apple kept it. It's pretty much perfect. So I look at it as this approach of if it's not broken, don't fix it. Sure, the bezels could be a little bit thinner, but it is what it is. Unless you decide to go with the all-new 13-inch size that the iPad Air offers. In my opinion, 13-inch iPad Air is just a little bit too big for me. And to be honest, I'd rather have a 13-inch MacBook Air over an iPad Air. That's just my take on it. The height of the 13-inch is 280.6 millimeters. The width is 214.9 millimeters. And the depth is the same at 6.1 millimeters. It weighs 617 grams. The M1 comes in space gray, starlight, pink, purple, and blue, and a little bit more vibrant colors than what is for the M2. I went to the Apple Store and saw the new blue color from the M2, and it looks gray. It doesn't even look blue to me. There's also purple, you have starlight, and space gray. On the back, you get a 12 megapixel wide camera that shoots 4K on both devices. And this is where we actually see our first major change, and that's with the front-facing camera. The M2 iPad Air has moved the 12 megapixel ultra-wide front camera to landscape orientation, which makes a lot more sense for FaceTime calls, Zoom meetings, and stuff like that. Both devices have a USB-C connector. Instead of Face ID, you get Touch ID with a Touch ID button, and you also get your volume up and down buttons in the same exact spot. The displays on both are, guess what? The exact same. And that's a little bit disappointing from Apple. They should be ashamed of themselves. You get a liquid retina display. It's an LED backlit display with IPS technology. You get True Tone in P3 wide color. The resolution is decent at 2360 by 1640 at 264 ppi. There's also an anti-reflective coating. I would have liked to have seen 120 Hz come to the iPad Air. It seems like that is never going to happen. One thing I almost forgot to mention is the 13-inch display on the M2 Air is a little bit better. If we go over to look at the 13-inch, the display is a little bit better and there's an SDR brightness of 600 nits. So just want to keep that in mind. But other than that, everything is the same for the display. If you haven't been able to tell already by this video, and I'm obviously being a little bit sarcastic, but there's not really much different when you look on the outside. But when we get into the inside, there are some slight differences that actually make a big upgrade. Starting with the storage. The M1 Air had terrible storage options. It was either 64 gigabytes or 256 gigabytes. With the M1 Air, I went with the base 64 gigabyte. And that was a terrible decision. Constantly had to delete apps and files, and it was just a mess over the last 2 years of trying to always free up space on this iPad. Enter in the M2 Air, and you get 128 gigabytes, 256 gigabytes, 512 gigabytes, or 1 terabyte. I chose to get 128 gigabytes. The biggest change by far is the chip going from M1 to M2. And it doesn't seem on the surface like that would be a significant jump. But honestly, feeling it out for the last 72 hours or so, it actually does feel different. The display does feel quicker. When I click on apps, they open faster. My exporting time on my videos are quicker. And it just feels like a snappier, quicker device than the M1. I think that's a pretty good jump for me. For the 2 years that I used the M1 Air, the performance and everything was really good. Never had any issues, and I'm not a Geekbench score kind of person, and I ran the tests and they were pretty much the same. It's just a feeling sometimes. The M2 Air does feel a lot better. But for the CPU on the M1 Air, this is what I got. And here's the GPU. Now, one thing that you do get with the M2 Air as opposed to the M1 Air is you get an 8-core CPU, which is the same, but you get a 10-core GPU, which is better. There's still a 16-core neural engine, but there is 100 gigabytes of memory bandwidth. Here's the CPU score for the M2 Air, and here's the GPU score. And I'm actually pretty familiar with the M2 chip. I have the M2 Mac Mini, and my wife uses the M2 MacBook Air. Both are really sufficient and great devices, and they perform really well. I think to me, the biggest disappointment between these two devices is the fact that the battery life is basically the same. Now, battery life isn't terrible. It gets me through the day, and I do have to charge it every day, but I would have liked to have seen about 2 to 3 hours bump in screen on time rather than what I was getting before. Here's how the speakers sound compared. Both cellular models support 5G, and with the M1 you get Wi-Fi 6, whereas with the M2 you get Wi-Fi 6E. You can find the iPad M1 Air right now on Amazon for $400, and the M2 iPad Air can be found on the Apple Store with a starting price of $599 at 128 gigabytes. One other thing that really disappoints me with this M2 Air is the fact that the 2nd gen Apple Pencil isn't compatible with it. And so I did have to get the Apple Pencil Pro because I do create digital products and it's important for my workflow. And that's just a little bit stupid, I think, on Apple's part to kind of gridlock something like that. A lot of people don't want to upgrade their pencil, but they want to upgrade their iPad. But to have to force people to do that is just a little bit annoying. It is good though that the Magic Keyboard that I previously used is compatible, so I didn't have to upgrade that. So, you win some, you lose some. If you have the M1 Air, I think you have a really good device, and I don't necessarily think you should upgrade if you have 256 gigabytes of storage. If storage is becoming an issue and you want something a little bit quicker, I would trade it in at Apple. I got over $300 to trade it in, and my new iPad was pretty cheap. If I was new to iPad, I would definitely go with the M2 Air. I think it's a really solid device, and I think it's a device that most people are going to want to buy. So that's it. That's comparing the M1 iPad Air to the M2 iPad Air. And I would go with the M2 iPad Air. Unless you already have the M1, then I wouldn't upgrade. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. As always, guys, thanks for watching. God bless, and I'll see you on the next one.